Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I am Muneeb Hamid with the news of this hour. Let's begin with the top stories first. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan has tested positive for COVID-19. In a tweet, Special Assistant to the Prime Minister on National Health Services, Faisal Sultan, said Prime Minister Khan is currently self-isolating at his home. Pakistan has recorded its highest daily spike in cases in 8 months with 3,876 infections since yesterday. Meanwhile, India's daily coronavirus infections have surged to a 4-month high as it reported nearly 41,000 new cases overnight. While global number of COVID-19 deaths have surpassed 2.7 million and the caseload has exceeded 122 million. Kabul says it called for the acceleration in peace talks and immediate end to violence and a comprehensive ceasefire in Afghanistan. On return from Moscow conference, Afghanistan's top negotiator Abdullah said the event was a step forward to boost the Doha talks and support Turkey's meeting on Afghanistan. Earlier, Pakistan repeated its resolve to facilitate a political settlement in Afghanistan but warned against the role of spoilers. In Myanmar, another protester has been killed during anti-coup demonstrations in Yangon. Activists say 238 protesters have been killed in the military crackdown since the 1st of February coup. Meanwhile, Twitter has suspended the Information Ministry's account under its manipulation and spam policy. Saudi Arabia has accused Iran of supporting Houthi attacks on the kingdom. In an interview, Saudi Minister of State for Foreign Affairs Adil Al-Jubair said the Yemeni rebels carried out the attacks using Iranian-made weapons. Earlier, the US condemned the latest Houthi attack on a Saudi oil refinery in the capital, Riyadh. And top-seeded Stefanos Tsitsipas and second-seeded Alexander Zverev have reached the final of the Mexican Open in Acapulco. World number 5, Tsitsipas beat Italian qualifier Lorenzo Musetti 6-1 and 6-3 in their Final Four contest. Earlier, Germany's Alexander Zverev beat Spas compatriot Dominik Koepfer 6-4 and 7-6 in the semi-final. The two will duel for the ATP title on Sunday. These were top stories. News in detail after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now let's have the news in detail. We'll start from Pakistan, where Prime Minister Imran Khan has tested positive for the COVID-19. In a tweet, Special Assistant to the Prime Minister on National Health Services, Faisal Sultan, said Prime Minister Khan is currently self-isolating at his home. Khan received the first shot of his COVID-19 vaccine on Thursday. Meanwhile, Pakistan also recorded its highest daily spike in cases in 8 months with 3,876 infections overnight. The country's caseload has reached over 623,000, while the number of fatalities has reached almost 13,800. Pakistan's positivity ratio has jumped to nearly 10%. Now, the number of global coronavirus deaths has surpassed 2.7 million, while the caseload has exceeded 122 million. Brazil has reported the highest single-day cases with more than 90,000 people testing positive overnight, while some 2,800 more people lost their lives in the country, the second highest number of deaths in a day. Details in this report. The health, economic and political complications prompted by the coronavirus pandemic are worsening by the day. A cohort of global scientists led by King's College London said there is growing evidence that COVID-19 can cause diabetes in some patients. In South America, many nations are facing an acute health crisis. Ecuador's health minister has resigned after less than 3 weeks on the job as prosecutors investigate allegations of favoritism in the rollout of vaccines. Meanwhile, Mexico's president thanked his U.S. counterpart Joe Biden for agreeing to provide 2.7 million vaccines. In the U.S., Dr. Anthony Fauci says the more contagious and likely more deadly variants linked to the U.K. is rapidly spreading in the U.S.
And that relates to the threat of a variant of concern, particularly the B.1.1.7 variant, which right now, as we know, is causing a significant degree of concern in Europe, where the flare and the surge that they are seeing is directly related to the variant 1.1.7. This variant, as you know, is every day getting more and more dominant.
Germany's health minister has warned of vaccine scarcity in Europe to contain the third wave of COVID-19. More countries are resuming the use of AstraZeneca's vaccine after assurances that its benefits outweigh the risks. Meanwhile, the UK and French prime ministers have received their first shots of the Oxford jab.
I really don't. I think you should listen. Don't just listen to me. Listen to all the scientists. Listen to what the European Medicines Agency had to say yesterday, to what the MHRA has said. The risk is COVID. This is a great thing to do.
Meanwhile, India has recorded over 40,000 new COVID-19 cases, the highest in 4 months. Moving on now, Kabul says it calls for the acceleration in peace talks, an immediate end to violence and a comprehensive ceasefire in Afghanistan. Kabul's top negotiator Abdullah said this on return from the Moscow conference. Abdullah said the event was a step forward to boost the Doha talks and support Turkey's meeting on Afghanistan. He also lauded the joint statement of extended troika on peaceful Afghan settlement. Earlier, Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi warned against the role of spoilers in the peace process. Speaking to his Afghan counterpart Hanif Atmar over the phone, Qureshi said all sides must work constructively for a peaceful Afghanistan. Despite peace process, the Taliban and the government have reported casualties of the other sides in attacks on different parts of the country. Now, in Myanmar, another protester has been killed during anti-coup demonstrations in Yangon. It comes amid increased international pressure on the military generals to shun the violence. 2 more people were killed overnight after soldiers opened fire in the northern ruby mining town of Mogok. Meanwhile, Twitter has suspended the Information Ministry's account under the manipulation and spam policy. Earlier, UN Rapporteur Tom Andrews called for sanctions in response to the army's ruthless attacks. In another development, the US House of Representatives have approved legislation condemning the military coup. Activists say 238 protesters have been killed in the military crackdown since the February 1st coup. Now, Saudi Arabia has accused Iran of supporting Houthi attacks on the kingdom. Saudi Minister of State for Foreign Affairs Adil Al-Jubair says the Yemeni rebels carried out the attacks using Iranian-made weapons. Al-Jubair said the presence of what he called the Iranian-backed separatists does not mean the peace is impossible in Yemen. In an interview, he said the rebels belong on a terrorism list and nobody should deal with them. Earlier, the U.S. condemned the latest Houthi attack on a Saudi oil refinery in the capital, Riyadh. State Department spokesperson Jelena Porter said this behavior shows an utter lack of concern for the safety of the civilian population. The UAE, Kuwait, Qatar and Lebanon also condemned the attack, describing it as a threat to the regional stability. China says the strategic dialogue with the United States was candid, constructive and helpful. The 2-day talks mark the first high-level contact between the two countries since President Joe Biden took office.
Talking to media after the conclusion of 3 rounds of tough and direct talks in Alaska, China's top diplomat Yang Jiechi said some important differences still persist. Foreign Minister Wang Yi said Beijing hopes Washington will meet it halfway with mutual respect. Wang reiterated that sovereignty and territorial integrity are major issues of principle. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said the two sides had a very candid conversation on an expansive agenda. Talking to reporters, Blinken said the world's top economies found areas where their interests overlap. He added these include Iran, North Korea, Afghanistan, and climate change.
Now, U.S. prosecutors have charged 10 Iranian nationals over an alleged long-running scheme to dodge sanctions on Tehran. They're trying to disguise $300 million in transactions, including the purchase of 2 oil tankers. All 10 defendants have been charged with conspiracy to violate legal sanctions against Iran. The prosecutors said the 8 men and 2 women are outside the U.S. and have not been arrested. They said the defendants conspired to abuse the U.S. financial system to conduct transactions on behalf of the Iranian government. The U.S. government has also filed a civil forfeiture action seeking more than $157 million. Moving on, now 13 people have been killed and 7 others wounded in several attacks in Nigeria's northwestern Kano state. Authorities say the gunmen attacked communities in Zangon, Kataf, Kaworo and Chikun areas of the state. They said assailants razed 56 houses, 16 motorcycles and burned several barns. Officials said troops were mobilized to repel the attacks. The gangs, locally known as bandits, burn and ransack villages and target schools for kidnappings for ransom. Now, Turkey has told the European Union it has maintained a constructive approach in the Mediterranean despite provocations from Greece and Cyprus. Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan held a virtual meeting with the European Union chiefs.
Tensions have flared over a dispute between Turkey and Greece over maritime jurisdiction in the Mediterranean. In the meeting, the Turkish presidency said Erdogan repeated a proposal for a regional Eastern Mediterranean conference. In a statement, it said the president expects a result from the upcoming EU summit that will pave the way for concrete efforts to move forward. Erdogan said the migrant burden on Turkey is rising. In a separate statement, the European Commission said it underlined the importance of sustained de-escalation. Meanwhile, the Turkish Coast Guard said they found 3 migrants dead in waters of the AEGHAN coastal town of Sisme after Greek Coast Guard beat them. The Greek Coast Guard rejected accusations, saying they do not treat migrants or people in danger that way.
Now, the International Criminal Court has sent notifications to Israel and Palestine of the opening of a war crimes probe. In a statement, the prosecutor's office said the parties have 1 month to seek a deferral. Earlier this month, the ICC prosecutor Fatou Bensouda said she would formally investigate war crimes in the Palestinian territories. While Palestinian Authority welcomed the announcement, Israel denounced it. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia has affirmed that its position on Israel remains unchanged. Saudi Minister of State for Foreign Affairs Adil Al-Jaber said the recent normalization deals will pay off only if they change Israel's position with regard to the annexation of Palestinian territory. More news coming up in this news bulletin after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now, moving on with this news stories. President Joe Biden has deplored a recent surge in anti-Asian violence in the United States. This comes after a deadly shooting rampage in Georgia left 8 people dead, including 6 women of Asian descent. During a visit to Georgia, Biden met leaders and state lawmakers from the Asian American community. Speaking after the meeting, Biden asked all Americans to stand together against hate. Vice President Kamala Harris, who is of Asian American descent, also accompanied the president. Harris said racism, xenophobia and sexism have always been real in America.
Over the past year, 3,800 such incidents have been reported, 2 of 3 by women. Everything from physical assaults to verbal accusations. And it's all harmful. And sadly, it's not new. Racism is real in America, and it has always been. Xenophobia is real in America, and always has been. Sexism, too.
Meanwhile, New Yorkers gathered for a vigil in support of victims of the Georgia attacks. While the US and Chinese ambassadors to the United States nations have also clashed over racism. And we will tell you all more about these news stories right now. And the argument took place during a General Assembly meeting to mark the International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. Now, the US Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield said racism continues to be a deadly challenge. However, she added for millions of people in countries like China and Myanmar, it is deadly. In response, China's Deputy UN Ambassador Dai Bing said the US has no license to tell other countries what to do. Dai said Thomas-Greenfield admitted to her country's ignoble human rights record. He called on the US to address racial discrimination, social injustice and police brutality on its soil. And the US says it is keen to strengthen security ties with India. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin said this during a meeting with his Indian counterpart Rajnath Singh in New Delhi. Austin said India is an increasingly important partner among rapidly shifting international dynamics. He said Washington will focus on regional security cooperation and military-to-military interactions and trade. Austin also met Indian Prime Minister Modi on his arrival in New Delhi. His two-day visit to the country comes against the backdrop of the Indo-Russian missile deal and India's border clash with China. A senior US senator has urged Austin to oppose the $5 billion India-Russia deal for the S-400 air defense systems. Now, the US has called on Somalia to hold transparent and inclusive elections as soon as possible to end the deadlock. In a statement, Secretary of State Antony Blinken called on all stakeholders to set aside narrow political objectives. He urged them to safeguard the country's future and find an agreement to conduct parliamentary and presidential polls. He said the current impasse undermines progress made and hinders the fight against terrorism. Somalia missed a deadline to hold an election by February 8, sparking a constitutional crisis. Now moving to Peru, where heavy rain, floods and mudslides have cut off communities and left families homeless in the northern PERU region. More than 3,600 families in the remote mountainous area are left stranded after 5 bridges collapsed. The locals say they have no access to drinking water and electricity. Authorities say the homeless may have to be permanently relocated to avoid similar incidents in the future. Housing Minister Solange Fernandez toured the region to assess the damage. Now, in Australia's New South Wales, a potentially life-threatening downpour has forced multiple evacuations orders from the authorities. The rains have flooded rivers and streets, cut power lines and caused a major Sydney dam to spill over. Officials say they had issued 9 evacuation orders for about 15 areas. Emergency services said a mini tornado ripped through a suburb in the west of Sydney, causing damage to more than 30 homes. Most of the coast of the state has already seen March rainfall records broken, but authorities warn the downpour is likely to continue for several days. Now, in Iceland, a volcano has erupted near the capital Reykjavik, following weeks of seismic activity. The country's meteorological office says the fissure took place near Fagradalsfjall mountain on the Reykjanes Peninsula. Authorities said the eruption posed no immediate danger to people on critical infrastructure. The weather agency said aviation is not expected to suffer either, as the volcano will not spew out much ash or smoke. The last eruption on the Reykjanes Peninsula was some 800 years ago. Iceland has also recorded more than 40,000 earthquakes in the past 3 weeks. Now, social media platforms WhatsApp, Facebook, Messenger and Instagram suffered a brief service outage across the globe. All 3 platforms belong to the US-based social media giant Facebook. Outage tracking website Down Detector showed nearly 1 million people reporting issues with Instagram. It said 20,000 users posted about problems with WhatsApp on the website. Facebook attributed the outage to unspecified technical issues and apologized to the users. However, a spokesperson for the company said it resolved the issue which prevented access to the services. French daredevil Valentin took to the sky with some death-defying stunts at an abandoned ski resort in France. Let's find out more in this report.
Delic turned the deserted Evoria resort into his own personal playground as he sped right across it. All geared up, he first took off from the snow-capped mountains to paraglide over and through the resort. While in the air, he launched off the rooftops and even ground his skis on a chairlift cable. He then landed to put on some insane ground tricks, including a backflip through an igloo. While keeping his glider intact on the ground, he again lifted off to the sky by fastening a ride from a horse-drawn sleigh. The 28-year-old started as an alpine free skier and paraglider before combining the two disciplines to master the field of speed riding. Delic dominated the tour in 2014.
Now, a breathtaking art exhibit is drenching views in a kaleidoscope-like world in New York's Chelsea market. Let's find out in this report. Embark upon a cinematic journey where the sheer beauty of mathematics, nature, and architecture coincide to inspire introspection and awe. Using fractals, mathematical equations represented as infinitely repeating patterns, Dutch artist Julius Horthuis manifested an art installation, running them through a computer software.
Julius, as I know, came across fractals while doing research for a separate project and instantly felt a connection with them. He was fascinated by how through mathematics you could take someone on a journey through almost an entirely new world. He has a background in film, and he was able to kind of combine that passion with fractal art. And in the same way that, you know, a documentary takes you through a journey of something in our real world, Julius, as the fractal artist, is able to take an audience on a journey through these fractal worlds.
Spectators have said it feels like being inside of a kaleidoscope, or like stepping into a science fiction world, or even being transmitted to a totally new dimension.
In the age we're living in, and after, you know, over a year of pandemic, and for a lot of people being isolated, we need something like this more than ever. I think art for a lot of people can be an escape or a refuge.
Geometric Properties runs through September 6 at Artec House. Now, in the U.S. state of Texas, a federal jury has directed Apple to pay over $300 million to personalized media communications. The tech giant was charged with infringing a patent related to digital rights management. The licensing firm sued Apple in 2015, alleging that the firm's iTunes service infringed 7 of its patents. Apple successfully challenged the personalized media communications case at the U.S. Patent Office, but an appeals court reversed that decision in March last year and paved the way for the trial. However, the iPhone maker says it is disappointed with the ruling and will appeal. Now let's have a look at the weather updates across the globe. that is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News. Take care.